Hi, and welcome to another 5 Minutes with Mark. We're going to continue in chapter 6, verses 45 to 52. Immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After saying farewell to them, he went up on the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was on the sea, and he was alone on the land. When he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came toward them early in the morning, walking on the sea. He intended to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So once again, as we go through Mark, we get a whole lot packed into just a few verses. This story takes place right after the feeding of the 5,000. So one of the things we know is that they've just been together. There have been 5,000 fed. Not quite sure how that happened. And so Jesus decides he needs to go by himself and pray. Again, this recharging of the batteries. So he sends the boat with the disciples ahead of them to get to the other side of the sea, to Bethsaida. And as they're on the sea, we hear that they were straining against the oars in an adverse wind. Other gospel writers talk about the wind being against them, but they're really unable to move this fishing boat because of the wind. And so Jesus starts walking on the water. And Mark says he intended to pass them by. I don't know if that means he was going to walk to the other side. I don't know what that means. And really the people who write about Mark aren't sure what it means either. And so when they see him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and they cried out. For they saw him and they were terrified. Immediately he said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And so as I'm looking at that, it's kind of interesting, because they thought he was a ghost. So is it the fact that this ghost was there that caused them to be afraid? But it says when they saw him, they were terrified. So were they terrified that it was Jesus? I mean, it isn't at all clear who they were afraid of and what they were afraid of, besides the fact that the boat was also in rough shape. But Jesus says, "Don't be afraid." And so we're playing in these words of fear and these words of being terrified. And even the next part of the verse, they were utterly astounded. We're playing with all sorts of variations of this word amazement or this word awe that are intertwined. And I don't know my Greek well enough to be able to address them. But all these feelings of fear and astonishment and awe are intertwined in the Gospel of Mark. But as Jesus gets in the boat, the wind ceases. They were astounded, and they go on their way. And then there's this kind of ominous end, verse 52. They did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. And so Mark is saying that they didn't understand about the loaves. They didn't understand Jesus's power. They didn't understand where his power came from. They didn't understand how this Jesus could do these things. And That makes sense. I mean, if I was there, I'd be kind of wondering too, wouldn't you? But Mark adds this ominous Old Testament, but their hearts were hardened. And that's a passive verb. This is nothing that the disciples did to themselves. Their hearts have been hardened from outside. And so this gets us back to all of the Mark questions about insiders and outsiders. And are their hearts hardened because they were really outsiders? And what does it take to soften a hardened heart? We may get there sometime, but for now, we'll see you another time. Thanks.